This sounds like a farce, but it's real, and it's a powerful sign of fundamental problems in the news that I haven't yet dug into on this show. What I'm about to tell you really happened just days ago. As I've said on this show, the two ingredients of truth are facts plus context. There is a hate monger who does not fact check anything about what he's talking about, and he ignores context. This guy gets invited by the biggest news agencies to come say anything and everything he wants to say. They adore him. They roll out a red carpet for him. In this case, we're not talking about right-wing media doing that for people with like election conspiracies. We're talking about media that claim to be mainstream. But that's not all. Finally, someone actually challenges him, too gently, I believe. And I kid you not, that journalist then gets in trouble with his own network for daring to challenge this guy at all. Yes, that really happened. But that's just the beginning. It gets worse. On this show, I've exposed so many lies that news organizations state as fact, and I've explained that I contact the corporate owners of news organizations sometimes because that can be a crucial step. So I reach out to these corporate news executives, and I never hear back. The executives shut down. They don't want to do anything. Well, this journalist who dared to challenge a hate monger, not only did he get in trouble with his own alleged news agency, but corporate executives even got involved as well. And not in a good way, at least not at first. Corporate owners jumped in a way that sure seems to threaten his career because he dared to try to do his job. If I was telling you that doctors refuse to treat patients and then invite someone into a hospital to poison people, you'd be like, what? No way. And then what if I told you one doctor had the guts to try to stop that person from poisoning people, and that doctor got called out and threatened by fellow doctors and the hospital's owners? It would make no sense. But that is what happened here. Journalism is a service. It's a fight for truth to deliver for you. And what happened here shows how broken the system is. Coming up, I'm going to talk you through this, what it says about news, and the effect it has on where people turn for information. Even this journalist didn't do the other half of what journalists should be doing. This also speaks to a gaping hole in the news and information system that few people know about, and that is nonfiction books. There is a key difference in how the book world works that lets people off the hook for lies, even more than at news agencies. I'll explain that. Plus, I answer a listener's question about politics and something involving Tim Walz, and a fact check about dads and household work. It's all coming up on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. So good to have you here. I'm Josh Levs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact checks the news. There are new people tuning in every week, which is so awesome. So thank you and welcome. Here's a basic rundown on who I am. I spent 20 years inside mainstream media, 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN. I became the lead fact checker on air at CNN. I fact checked everything: politics, economic stuff, families. Then I wrote a book about modern families and busting myths about dads. And that led to all this other work. So I left CNN and launched my own business. Throughout my time in news, and since, I have seen systemic, fundamental problems that prevent the news industry from doing its job. When you love something, you cannot stand to see it fail. And I love the role of a free press in society. I don't ever expect you to take my word for anything. So with each episode, I send out a newsletter. It has links and information. And I invite you to get in touch with me with anything you want me to fact check, with questions, with all that. Because there is so much hate and noise in the social media system, I created a new system here. So there are two ways to contact me. While my newsletter is free, supporters can become paid subscribers to the newsletter. When you do that, you get exclusive content and you get direct access to me. So a lot of what you hear me talk about on this show is what these paid subscribers are bringing to me. There also is another way for other people to contact me without supporting if you choose. That is a link through my website. You can find out all this stuff at my website, joshlevs.com, JOSHLEVS.com, and there are links in the show notes. As I record this, last week's episode has just come out, and last week's episode was different from others because it was a recording of a speech I gave on the anniversary of the October 7th terrorist massacres by Hamas in Israel. I talked about themes of this show, facts and context, the fight for truth. I'm already getting amazing responses from so many of you, and you're telling me that you're sharing it. Thank you so much. Every response means a great deal. I really appreciate it. As I mentioned, I take questions, and recently I got one from someone who said, how come you haven't talked about what Tim Walz said about the time that he was in China? So I said I would address this on the show. I go where the lies are most dangerous. Something I explained in an earlier episode is that the first question in all of journalism is inherently and inevitably subjective, and that is what to cover. All right, so we always have to use values to figure that out, and I go to where the lies are most dangerous. When Tim Walz was or was not in China has zero effect on anyone's life, and he has said he misspoke and he owned it. Meanwhile, I have talked a lot about certain lies coming from the Trump campaign because they are dangerous. Trump's lies about immigration, for example, have led to these death threats in Springfield, Ohio. His lies about the election being stolen led to January 6th. His lies about immigration in general and the way he fuels something called the Great Replacement Theory led to the Charlottesville Nazis, their riot, basically. And that was deadly. Someone got killed there. And those lies about immigration also led to the horrific massacre at a Pittsburgh synagogue. So I go to where the lies are most dangerous. And what you see is that those are on the right, and they're also on the far left. There are people in this country openly supporting an equally anti-democratic effort. That one is Islamist, which is different from saying Muslim, as I've said before. Islamist is its own thing. Those lies fuel horrific evil, including the world's most evil terrorist attack, which is what I talked about last week. I would love it if all politicians were always accurate about everything. But there's a difference between fairness and both sidesism. It would be both sidesism to think, no, every time I point out that Trump and his campaign have some dangerous lie, I need to go find something that Democrats have gotten wrong. We have to call it like it is. And I pointed out just factually, statistically, the Republican Party in Washington is now basically exclusively on board with the big lie of the election being stolen. You either have to say it or stay quiet, otherwise they kick you out, as we saw with Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney. The Democratic Party has not yet been taken over by the big lie of the left, which is big bad Israel. In fact, a couple members of the squad recently lost their primaries. All right, so that helps you understand where I'm coming from. And that is a good way for us to get into what today's topic is all about. Listeners wrote me about this right after it happened, and a lot of them couldn't believe what they were reading. Sadly, I could. Here's the deal. There is a writer named Ta-Nehisi Coates. He is this darling of certain people in the progressive left and hugely a darling of the media. People worship him, not for any journalistic reason. They like the way that he uses words, the way that he writes. He has this new book, which is about several different places, but the largest section of it is a vicious anti-Israel screed. Of course, the media has been welcoming him with open arms to say whatever he wants. Except in one place, on CBS, there is a host named Tony DeCopel. He is one of three hosts on the morning show. Tony became the first person in allegedly mainstream news to actually challenge Ta-Nehisi in any kind of substantial way.
I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel in any condition has a right to exist?
Obviously, all those things should be pointed out. And just so you know, it's not a question whether that is in his book. He doesn't pretend that it is. He presents Israel in this vacuum as an evil entity doing these evil things with literally no context. I will also let you know I have requested a review copy of the book. I refuse to spend money on it. I doubt they'll send me one. We'll see. He wrote what a handful of propagandists told him during a 10-day trip. There are no mentions of all kinds of other things as well. The Intifada from 2000 to 2005 that killed more than 1,000 Israelis, Israel's many peace offers despite all the terrorism. No mentions of Hamas or October 7th or Iran. None of this. There are a couple articles I'll post about this in the newsletter. I want to stay focused on what I can offer here, which is about the media. So let's start with how Ta-Nehisi responded to that.
Well, I would say the perspective that you just outlined, there is no shortage of that perspective in American media. That's the first thing I would say. I am most concerned always with those who don't have a voice, with those who don't have the ability to talk.
Everything about that is wrong. Most importantly, for our purposes, he called what Tony said a perspective. This host cited a long list of facts. All of the following things are not in your book. He wasn't talking about perspectives, except at the very end when he asked about the idea of Israel not having a right to exist. That would be a perspective, but Ta-Nehisi is not referring to that. He is referring to that long list of facts as a perspective. We desperately need the media to focus on truth, facts plus context. Ta-Nehisi doesn't offer either. He went on to say that people who believe more sympathetically about Israel and its right to exist don't have a problem getting their voice out, but he insisted the people he talked to had stories that he has not heard. How is that possible? The world is drenched in all this stuff. Listen to previous episodes of this show. If you're new to it, I recommend going back to episode 1, in which I explained the truth about the term occupation, and I did episodes on how the news covers terrorism and international law and anti-Semitic stereotypes, the anti-Israel narratives, the whitewashing of terrorism dominates the media. It's everywhere. And it's evidenced by the existence of this interview itself. Every news site, and of course the Daily Show, all these places are inviting Ta-Nehisi to come say everything he wants to say, despite the fact that he does not seek truth. What is he looking at in which those voices are allegedly missing? This host, Tony, at the end made some comment like, hey, you're still invited to the high holidays, which I guess was Tony's way of indicating that he happens to be Jewish. A journalist finally does something by challenging the author of this bigoted book. And people inside CBS News flip out. The host, Tony, he gets in trouble. So much so that top CBS executives acted against him. See what I said at the top? The whole thing is like a farce. It's the exact opposite of what news agencies should do. On October 7th, CBS executives used their morning meeting to criticize this interview. The Free Press got sound from this. First, there was the head of CBS News, Wendy McMahon, who came on and introduced Adrienne Roark, who is in charge of news gathering. Adrienne Roark then talked about what she called the importance of objectivity and checking bias at the door. And she said this specifically about the interview.
I want to thank every single one who reached out for your honesty, your transparency, and your commitment. So I want to address 3 things. Number 1, after a review of our coverage, including the interview, it's clear there are times we have not met our editorial standards. Number 2, this has been addressed, and it will continue to be in the future. And number 3, I want to acknowledge and I want to apologize that it's taken this long.
Unreal. By the way, what do you mean this long? They did that meeting on a Monday. The interview was just a few days earlier. Meanwhile, they still have not responded to false things that CBS has said months and years ago. This moral failure, it's exactly like the universities that don't know how to respond to people who support the big lie of the left. Universities and news agencies have no problem standing up to people who support the big lie of the right, the Great Replacement Theory and stolen election. But the big lie of the left, this imaginary big bad Israel, that stuff. Suddenly you have to check your bias at the door. Meanwhile, news agencies, including CBS, actively encourage other people to bring their lived experiences and perspectives to their work. Here's the host of that same show, CBS Mornings, Gayle King. This was in 2020 after multiple awful reports of things happening to Black men. Here is a shortened version of what Gayle King said.
As the daughter of a Black man and the mother of a Black man, this is really too much for me today. I'm still rattled by that last story. And she's practically strangling her dog to make these false accusations against another Black man. I'm still so upset by that last story where the man is handcuffed underneath a car where people are pleading, please, he can't breathe, and we're watching a man die. I don't even know what to do or how to handle this at this particular time. I am speechless. It feels to me like an open season, and that it's just not sometimes a safe place to be in this country for Black men.
Can't blame her for feeling that way. Tony Dokoupil, meanwhile, in this interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates, did not get emotional, even though he was sitting with an anti-Semitic hate monger who pushes the kinds of lies that are getting Jewish people attacked and killed all over the world. He remained calm, but even that is not allowed. But this gets worse. CBS is owned by Paramount. The co-CEO of Paramount, George Cheeks, put out this pathetic statement saying, quote, "This must lead to further substantive dialogue about perceptions of inconsistent treatment, implicit bias, and the important standards our news division has in place to establish guardrails for fairness and objectivity." To be clear, he didn't say anything in defense of this anchor. This statement clearly seemed to be going against this host, and that's how it was widely interpreted, and the folks at Paramount never said otherwise. They could have corrected it if he actually supported this host. Then, at least the chair of Paramount Global, Shari Redstone, weighed in, and she did support this guy, Tony Dokoupil. By the way, I've been trying to reach out to Shari, so if anyone listening knows her, please send her this episode. The fact that the controversy here is about an anchor challenging the bias of an author, instead of the controversy here being about everyone else in the media letting this author spew his nonsense. That in and of itself is such an indictment of the media. But, I'm going to say it again, it gets even worse than this. That is coming up next. Thank you to the organizations coming along to sponsor this show and helping make it possible. One of them is MIT45. This company is so interesting. It is on a mission to bring peace, vitality, and relief to the world by empowering individuals to be more of their unique, incredible selves. They do this by creating innovative, exceptional products, sourcing high-quality materials, and keeping standards high, including for safety. Their products include Kratom, and the folks at MIT45 want you to learn all about it and make informed decisions. Check them out. There's a website that they're encouraging you to take a look at, and you will find it in the show notes and in my newsletter. Do you know what did not happen in this CBS interview, or anywhere else for that matter? Fact-checking. While the host I mentioned did at least ask about things that were left out, which is essential, no one checked the facts that Ta-Nehisi Coates claims, including in that interview itself, like this.
The country of Israel is a state in which half the population exists on one tier of citizenship, and everybody else that's ruled by Israelis exists on another tier, including Palestinian Israeli citizens. The only people that exist on that first tier are Israeli Jews. Why do we support that? Why is that okay? I'm the child of Jim Crow. I'm the child of people that were born into a country where that was exactly the case of American apartheid. I walk over there and I walk through the occupied territories and I walk down the street in Hebron. And a guy says to me, I can't walk down the street unless I profess my religion.
No. Here are facts. Israel's population is 3/4 Jewish. All Israeli citizens, no matter what background or religion or whatever, have the same rights. So where do these lies come from? Well, for the purposes of propaganda, people pretend that Gaza and the entire West Bank are part of Israel, which they aren't. Gaza is controlled by Hamas. The Palestinian Authority controls the Palestinian parts of the West Bank. In Israel, you're walking down the street, you're in Tel Aviv or whatever, no one asks you your religion. No one cares. Anyone who's been there knows that. Arab and Muslim people serve in the parliament. It's called the Knesset in the capital, Jerusalem. The head of Israel's biggest bank is an Arab Israeli. These are just facts. These are not perspectives. where Palestinian leaders are in charge, areas that are under Palestinian control, there are different rules, of course, because they make their laws and Israel does not. Now, for Israeli-controlled areas of the West Bank, there are security operations in place which are necessary because of all the terrorism. And yeah, there they make sure that the people allowed into those areas are Israeli and are allowed to come in. They don't ask, what are your beliefs? They don't care what you believe about God. That's just not how it works. Ta-Nehisi doesn't know or doesn't care. And these lies, as I said earlier, fuel the hatred that gets people killed. No one fact-checked Ta-Nehisi about this stuff. And I'm going to toss in one more thing. I don't think I've had a chance to mention on this show. Do you want to hear something that's much more like apartheid than any of this stuff that people like him claim? Jewish people like me, we are not allowed to pray at the holiest site in Judaism. The holiest site is the Temple Mount. It is also the third holiest site in Islam. And in an effort to keep peace, decades ago, Israeli leaders agreed that Jewish people won't pray there. Like, even if we can visit, if anyone perceives that we might be praying, that is called a provocation. No members of other religions would ever accept rules in which they're not allowed to pray at the holiest site in their religion. But people like Ta-Nehisi don't care. In this interview, Ta-Nehisi said he has a very, 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 very moral compass about this, even though he clearly doesn't. Apparently, someone at CBS who is respected internally did speak up on Tony's behalf, but obviously not enough people did. This has a chilling effect across the entire news world. Most people are not brave enough to challenge bosses. That's just the deal. I've seen it in so many ways over the years. People fear for their jobs. And this tells them, this you cannot do. Because even if you're an anchor of a morning news show, which is a high-ranking position, watch out. That, in turn, has a big effect on people like you, where you can go for a source of truth. Because if people want to get news that is not skewed by the big lie of the left, well, they can't go to these mainstream outlets. But if they go to right-wing outlets, they might not have this big lie, but they probably will have the big lie of the right. So where is there to go? I just spoke at a journalism school the other day, and I'll be sharing some of that with you in the future. And I get asked this all the time. Is there a specific outlet you recommend? And I said no, because it's systemic, unfortunately. And that's the biggest reason this show exists. There are people who do go looking for facts, but you have to find them. So I went looking. Did anyone do great fact-checking work on this specifically? And here's something I found. There is a guy named Coleman Hughes. Here are some clips from an interview that he did on a podcast called Undercurrents.
There is nothing analogous to that in the plight of African Americans during Jim Crow, whose primary demand was equal citizenship, full stop. The central thrust of the civil rights movement was, we want to be allowed to vote, we want to be allowed to go to restaurants, and so forth. It was not, we want to dominate the state, we want to destroy the existence, we want to create essentially a Black-dominated ethno-state. From the river to the sea is a demand that from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, Palestinians rule. We know how that would end because Jews were ethnically cleansed from every state in the Middle East. He's wrong to say that the Palestinian perspective doesn't get aired. In the United Nations, there's been more Security Council resolutions against the state of Israel than against all other states combined, which is farcical, considering that Israel within its borders proper is a liberal democracy.
Do you see what he's doing there? He keeps listing facts, right? He keeps coming back to concrete things. And what this means for you is that you end up in this unfair position in which you have to look to commentators for facts, because in the mainstream news world, reporters get in trouble if they try to present fact checks to a bigot who is ignoring facts. By the way, I read about Coleman Hughes. The New York Times had called him a conservative, and then he posted that he isn't a conservative and has never called himself that. He has said that he has only voted for Democrats, including Biden. He said his only other option has been Trump. By the way, Ta-Nehisi's father is republishing an anti-Semitic screed of his own, and this guy Coleman Hughes pointed out that Ta-Nehisi has been accusing white Americans of refusing to challenge their own biases, but he refuses to do the same himself, challenging biases he learned as a kid. He is loving what happened at CBS. In interviews since, he's been saying that interview did him a favor. He described it as a pop quiz, and he said he had done his homework, which is an especially inapt metaphor because when it comes to journalism, he doesn't do the most basic homework. What would the most basic homework be? ABCs? Arithmetic? Whatever. But the news world adores him. All right. This also gets at something broader. I mentioned earlier that books are a gaping hole in the news and information ecosystem when it comes to truth. That is coming up. As you heard me mention earlier, I just got back from a series of speaking events. I love going on the road and meeting people. I would love to come where you are and speak to an organization near you. I do talks about the fight for truth in a world of misinformation and all the topics you hear about here on this show. Plus, now I'm doing events together with a historic figure that nobody knew about, America's first Black spy master, George E. Hocker Jr. We're going on the road together. You can get information about all this at my website, joshlevs.com, and there's a form you can fill out for bookings. When news agencies publish things that are false, they are technically supposed to do something about it. If you've listened to this show, you know most of the time they don't. But they're supposed to, because there is an obligation there. However, that's not the case with books. When I was speaking with students at a journalism school the other day, I mentioned this, and a lot of eyes went wide. It surprises people. Book publishers generally get in writing that they will not be fact-checking things, basically. The author is responsible for fact-checking themselves, and most authors don't do any kind of deep dives into claims in order to see what's true or what's not. When I wrote my book, All In, about modern families and modern dads, I hired a bunch of fellow former CNN fact-checkers to piece through my stuff and try to find better stats and try to catch anything they could. But in general, that's not something that happens. So when you look at a book that's sold as nonfiction, it might be filled with fiction. I'm going to give you an example here. Years ago, I read this story, and this one happened to be in the Daily Beast. It said that there was, quote, a particularly jarring study that notes that 30% of men admitted to doing housework badly on purpose because they knew their spouse would step in to fix it and then would do the task for them going forward. I knew that that's not true because of all the fact-checking I had done. So I went digging to see what was going on here. I wrote about this. You can see it in the Dad Facts section of my website. There's a ton of stuff like this. Just joshlevs.com/dadfacts. One word. Here's what I found. This report in the Daily Beast was a review of a book. I looked into the book. The book had that claim in it, mentioning a study, and it was sourcing an article in the Telegraph, which is a paper from London. That article was one of many reports that had been written off of a news release from, I kid you not, a small plumbing company in England. So I contacted the plumbing company to try to figure out where they got it from. They put me in touch with some agency in the UK that they had hired to work on this. The agency had no information about it on their website. Someone there told me that they had worked with a company in the United States to carry out some kind of survey. I contacted them. No one would say anything. No one had any information about it. And as soon as they figured out who I am, they shut down and just didn't want to talk to me. I reached out to the author of that book, and we ended up having dinner together in New York when I was up there at this great place in the Bronx. She told me she appreciated it, which is exactly what you should do when someone comes along with facts. You know, tons of nonfiction books are written by people who are not journalists and who have every reason to believe that if they see something in a newspaper or a news site, they should be able to trust it. It's up to the news agencies to fact check this stuff instead of running with it. But they don't. So I was talking about an author earlier in this episode. In general, authors are able to get away with saying all kinds of stuff, and the publishing houses don't have any responsibility. But here's what news agencies do. They bring people on the air who wrote nonfiction books, and they interview them, and they let them say anything as though somehow, because it's in a book, it must be true. And they don't tell their audiences that no one fact-checked it. It might be the biggest gaping hole in the news and information ecosystem. We really need a generational fight to prize truth. And that generational fight is something I'm going to be covering in a future episode. As always, I would love to hear from you with what you think about all of this. As I mentioned at the top, there are 2 ways to get in touch with me. Paid subscribers to the newsletter can message me or write in the comments there. Everyone else can find a form at my website. In the meantime, one of the best ways that you can support this show is to subscribe, rate, and review. So open up whatever app on your phone gives you podcasts and just search They Stand Corrected. Be sure to click subscribe and click to give it a great rating and a great review. That makes all the difference because we are in a world of algorithms and we need to use those algorithms to our benefit. In the moment that you're doing that you're subscribing, rating, reviewing, posting about this, telling your friends to listen to it, you are being a warrior for truth. And that is a beautiful thing. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week.